Hey, what's up, nerds? It's Paul at Radio Free Hammerhall. Today, I wanted to take a look at allies and coalition units in Age of Sigmar and, kind of where we're at with these things. I've been noticing, over time, it seems like there has been a decreased use of allies and coalition units. And I think a big part of that is some rule changes that happened specifically like in third edition, and also just some design changes of how everything has kind of worked over time. Just for a little history lesson, so to speak, on how all of this worked in Age of Sigmar. When the game was first launched and got points, the pitch battle profiles then, as they do now, have allies listed in them. But everything was much more fragmented in those days. So you kind of had to have allies in your list to really flesh out a force for most armies. And a lot of times you would end up just playing in a Grand Alliance force that didn't really necessarily need allies, and it was just kind of a soup thing. And that's something that actually there's not even rules for that in third edition anymore. Over time, everything got battle tomes, and things were kind of recombined back into more cohesive armies that had more well-rounded rosters available to them. And it really, I think, started really decreasing the number of instances you saw of allies showing up. In addition, when we first got the first round of battle tomes for the 4 Chaos God factions, all of those, the way their keyword identity, so to speak, in those armies worked was that the Chaos God keyword, like Nurgle, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, Khorne, that was the keyword that everything in the army linked back to. So you could have instances where you had units from Slaves to Darkness that you could give a Mark of Chaos to, and it wouldn't even be considered an ally. It would just be part of your army that was just not in that book. And as we came into third edition, actually, I think the change started before that. That really started changing into more rules that look like what we have with Coalition now, and all of the books moved to a battle tome keyword: Maggotkin of Nurgle, Disciples of Tzeentch, etc. So, and in addition, like all of the abilities in the army started keywording in on things that only existed in that battle tome. So, a Nurgle command ability would only be able to impact your Maggotkin units. It wouldn't be able to do anything to, Nurgle marked Slave to Darkness stuff. So it's kind of left us with this interesting situation. We had this idea of coalition come in, where it's a bit closer of a relationship to the army than just allies. And that has, the way coalition actually works seems to change a little bit between armies. You have Cities of Sigmar, where those get extra abilities. There's some armies that have coalition that they are adding things like keywords onto the war scrolls or giving them some kind of abilities. But in general, like by default, coalition is really not that much different than allies. And just a quick refresher from a rules perspective on what these things actually are and how they are able to be included in your lists. Each pitch battle profile for an army will include a list of factions that can be allies. And for allies, you were allowed to have 1 in every 4 of your units in the army be an allied faction. In addition, For match play, you are restricted in the total number of points that you allocate towards allied units. So for a 2,000 point army, that is 400 points, and in a 1,000 point army, it's 200 points. So you can kind of conclude from that, and the way they've broken it down elsewhere, that it's 20% of your total points that we're going with there. And then coalition is typically also 1 in 4 units, and that is going to be a very specific list in the battle traits of your battle tome that tell you what things can be coalition. Frequently, we'll have different sub-factions that will have different coalition rules. Particularly, Cities of Sigmar is a mess with that. And then we have the little exception of Slaves to Darkness being able to be taken as 2 in every 4 units in the 4 Chaos God battle tomes. So, and those there, as I said, they tend to sprinkle on some additional rules that you can get with that. So let's take a look. I kind of made some charts here of each of the Grand Alliances and how things interact between them. Before I kind of jump into this, though, I do want to mention that we do have other things that are, it's basically like on their war scroll that they mix with other armies, and it's just not on these charts specifically. So in order, we have Gotrek that can go into any army as an ally, and he will just take up all of your ally points, even if you don't have enough. In Chaos, we have Archaon, who can go into Slaves to Darkness in any of the 4 Chaos God armies. In Death, Nagash can go in any army, and in Destruction, Kragnos can go in any army. Then we also have the Mega Gargants, and those that have the special versions that can be mercenaries in other armies. And then we also have those Regiments of Renown boxes that have come out fairly recently, and that those can mix into other armies of their Grand Alliance other than the army that they're actually from. Anyway, so that out of the way, let's look at just how the different armies interact. So along the left, that is our allegiances. So that's what battle tome stuff comes with. So as we look across to the right, we're playing with that army, and we're seeing across the top, those are what armies can be used in that army as either allies or coalition. Anything marked with an A is allies. Anything marked with a C is coalition. And if it has an asterisk, then there's a note off to the side of what is special going on with that. Except what did I do? That's weird. I think I messed something up on Skaven, but that's okay. So let's go down the line here. Anything black, there's no interaction at all. So Beasts of Chaos, the only allies that they can take are Slaves to Darkness. So that's a pretty limited pool of what they can actually be bringing in. For Khorne, Beasts of Chaos and Slaves to Darkness can be coalition. Maggotkin of Nurgle and Slaves to Darkness can be allies. And for allies, nothing can have the Tzeentch mark or Mark of Chaos keywords. And then coalition gain the Khorne keyword if they have the Mark of Chaos. I'm sorry. Let me restart that sentence. My brain is just not working quite right now. Coalition, if it is Beasts of Chaos, it gets the Khorne keyword. If it is Slaves to Darkness, it needs to have the Mark of Chaos keyword, and that mark becomes Khorne. Basically the same sort of deal in Disciples of Tzeentch. That's how all 4 Chaos Gods really work. So Beasts of Chaos are coalition, Slaanesh can be allies, and then Slaves to Darkness are allies or coalition based on what their god mark is and whether or not they have the Mark of Chaos keyword. Slaanesh and Nurgle, basically the same. Slaanesh can ally with Tzeentch or Nurgle, though. Maggotkin can ally with Khorne or with Slaanesh. So what I find kind of interesting here is that, and then we're going to find going through all of these different grids that I've made here, or matrices, these things are not always like reciprocal. There's no way in Beasts of Chaos to take anything else as coalition, but they can be coalition in all of the Godmark armies, and they can be allies in Slaves to Darkness, but they can ally in Slaves to Darkness into Beasts of Chaos. Khorne, for example, it only has allies of Nurgle in both directions. And then, I mean, the interesting exception in here, too, is that you can have some coalition in Maggotkin that are Skaven, but they must be clans Pestilens and have that Nurgle keyword as well. So Nurgle has a little bit wider of an array of things that it can take in. That is actually what kind of got me thinking about this topic to begin with. I started messing around with the idea of narrative lists that are sort of a broader Nurgle coalition, bringing in some Pestilens and some Beasts of Chaos and some Slaves to Darkness to kind of get that whole grouping of everything that is under Nurgle's influence, and seeing what kind of synergies they might be and how things might work together, what's available. And then, like, the thing that really got me excited is I randomly ran across some old Pestigore models that one of my friends gave to me. And then I bought some more, so I actually had the command, and that's on its way from Germany at the moment. So, stay tuned for the wider Nurgle coalition army that I'm working on. But it's definitely a narrative army. It's not going to be a competitive army by any means. It's just going to be fun lists. Skaven are one of those armies that don't really play well with others. They can't ally with anybody else except for Nurgle if the general of the army is Clan Pestilens. And then Slaves to Darkness, they can take any of the 4 Chaos Gods as allies and Beasts of Chaos as allies. And I think I screwed this up. I don't think they can take any Skaven allies, but let me just double check on my phone really quick while I can just look it up in 2 seconds. Yes, that is correct. They cannot take Skaven. I must have just copied and pasted something incorrectly. There, it's fixed. So, Skaven don't play nicely with others. And obviously nothing can ally with itself. So that diagonal just is going to be there with everybody. So Slaves to Darkness has this really broad base that they can work with and pull things in from all sorts of different armies. So when I first started putting this video together, I was really thinking about starting to kind of go down the road a little bit of what are allies and coalition units that are good, competitively, right? How do you optimize using these? And when I started really digging into it, I realized that there's a reason that we're not seeing coalition and allies very much anymore. It's that when you do that, those units are typically losing a lot of their power. So you have to really have a war scroll that is good on its own, does not need any army allegiance abilities or enhancements whatsoever to be good and do its thing and be worth its points. So that means there's a very short list of units that you even have to pull from that are like worth taking in a list that like that makes sense for a more competitive minded player. But if you look at what's going on here in all four of these charts that I'm going to be going through, this is all very, very narratively driven, right? Like the beasts of chaos, they are just like creations of the chaos gods, right? They're just like these spawns of chaos. So it would make sense that they weren't necessarily bringing in anybody except maybe some slaves to darkness guys. And then sort of the same thing the other way around, that the beasts of chaos can just kind of end up being followers of whoever is nearby. Slaves to darkness makes sense that they'll pull from any of the four chaos gods and beasts of chaos. Skaven just don't play with others, including themselves. So that certainly is making sense there. And, you know, Nurgle being able to take Skaven Pestilence as coalition, you know, they're practically Nurgle as it is, right? So that's basically it here on Chaos. Let's flip over to Death really quick. Death is probably the easiest one to look at here. This is kind of odd in that you have Ossiarch Bone Reapers. They cannot ally with anybody. They cannot have coalition with anybody. But Flesh Eater Courts, Night Haunt, Soulblight Grave Lords, those three, if you take any of those allegiances, you can ally in the other two death armies. So not overly complicated. And in here, there's nothing special going on. It's, you know, very simple. Like, other than Ossiarch Bone Reapers, everybody can take everybody else's allies. Then we pop over. I'm going to skip over order and go to destruction. Over here, again, we have Sons of Bahamut cannot take any allies at all. There's also no coalition in destruction. Ogres, they can only take some Gloomspite Gits. They can only be Ale Guzzler Gargants or Troggoths out of Gloomspite Gits. Otherwise, they do not ally with anybody. And then Orcs and Gits will both ally with each other, and that is it. That's it for destruction. There's just not a lot of mixing going on in destruction armies whatsoever. And it kind of makes sense, narratively speaking, because like they're all just kind of, they're not that organized. They don't really all have their shit together. So like the idea of them collaborating with other people doesn't really make any sense. All right, so let's, last but not least, certainly, let's look at order. Order is a mess. I would say order is mainly a mess because Cities of Sigmar is a colossal mess. Now, if we look over this chart in general, you will see that there is a lot less black here than there is in those other Grand Alliances. We'll see, looking down this, every army can take Stormcast Eternals either as allies or coalition. And the only reason in Cities of Sigmar that they are not allies, they're not the universal ally, is that they're coalition all the time. So if you had them also be allies, then you'd be able to double up effectively. And there are some armies that seem to actually be able to do that. Cities of Sigmar. The only army that on some level they do not work with is Seraphon. Everybody else is either allies or coalition in some way. So Cities of Sigmar is complicated, right? Each city, effectively their subfactions, have their own sets of ally and coalition rules. Stormcast Eternals are just coalition for the whole army. And then, Caradron Overlords are coalition in Tempest's Eye. You have Sylvaneth that cannot be allies in Living City or Greywater Fastness, but in Living City, they are coalition instead of being allies. In Greywater Fastness, they are just super mad with that city because everything around it became a total wasteland. Daughters of Cain are coalition in Harcuron, which is the city that used to be a name that is escaping my brain at the moment. Anyway, Marathi took over a city, so you can coalition in Daughters of Cain, and it's basically all like elven stuff. That's the only things that you can actually use in that city. Fireslayers and Deepkin, those are just allies all the time for everybody. And then in Settler's Gain, Lumineth are coalition. But interestingly, like that is the only place in this army that Lumineth can go. If they are not in Settler's Gain, you can't take ally or coalition Lumineth anywhere else. And really, in other armies, you can take Daughters of Cain as an ally. But that's the one that comes in that's like it only works in one city. Which is interesting because you would think that Teclis would be a little bit more oriented towards working with others, but not so much. Now, if we take a quick look, if we just kind of cover up Seraphon and Stormcast for a moment. Stormcast, of course, basically just work with everybody. But now we go through the elves and the dwarves. So elves, Daughters of Cain, Deepkin, Lumineth, and effectively Sylvaneth, because there's elves in the army and Alariel is an elf. Those armies, they basically all ally with each other. So all of the elves ally with all of the other elves, all of the dwarves, so Fireslayers and Caradron Overlords, they ally with each other as well. And then Caradron can take Fireslayers as coalition in one of their subfactions. Which is interesting. So it kind of leads me to the conclusion that, your dwarves and your elves in Age of Sigmar are apparently super racist. Even to the extent that Caradron Overlords, they can take allies from Cities of Sigmar, but only if they are other dwarves. So I'm kind of surprised that we didn't have that exception pop up in other armies as well. And sort of on the flip side, I would almost think that Caradron Overlords and Fireslayers might be kind of like flipped in that sense, that they could be like, they seem like they would, like Caradron seem like they might just work for the highest bidder, and Fireslayers seem like they might just work for whoever is giving them Urgold. So essentially the highest bidder there as well. But not the case. They're both fairly restrictive and racially restricted as to who they're working with. Seraphon, they do not work with anybody except allying with Stormcast Eternals and, according to this, Cities of Sigmar, but I think I screwed that one up too. Hold, please. I will look that up again very quickly. Order Cities of... Nope. Seraphon. Pitch battle profiles. Oh, I was correct. They do take Cities of Sigmar as allies, which is weird because they won't help Cities of Sigmar, but they'll let Cities of Sigmar help them. Which again is interesting. There's not really a lot in Cities of Sigmar that I would see wanting to take as allies anywhere else for any purpose other than narrative. Stormcast Eternals, they will be allies with everybody other than Daughters of Cain, which is interesting. The Stormcast are mad at Marathi, probably because of the whole Harkuron thing. And they can take Cities of Sigmar as coalition in Stormkeep specifically. And then once again, Sylvaneth are all the elves and Stormcast Eternals, except Daughters of Cain. Again, they don't want to work with Daughters of Cain, probably for Harkuron related reasons. So as you can see here, this is very, very narratively driven. All 4 Grand Alliances, you're allying in with other factions that your army is friends with. So this is not a situation where it's like, this army is missing something gameplay-wise, so we'll let you take something from this other army. This is all strictly narrative. And it's interesting to an extent, because I would say almost that, narrative players don't need an excuse to bend or break the rules. But at the same time, it seems like this idea is kind of planting it in players' heads that you can kind of bend and break the rules, that it's kind of allowed. Because not everybody is going to look at the rule book and say these are guidelines. So they're throwing things into the rules and saying, yeah, this part of it is really just guidelines. If you are playing an army, we're going to throw in these other things narratively that you can do with it to kind of expand out what you're doing. So yeah, I thought this was pretty interesting. I am very hard pressed to see where allies and allies in particular, I have to say, like where that actually works, where it's actually a good idea. I think the most common ally I have seen these days has been, a Celestant Prime showing up elsewhere. And even when you have coalition as an option, it seems like weird corner case pseudo narrative things that people are really pulling those in for. There's just not a lot hanging out in the other armies that really function well as an ally. It's either you're losing a lot because you're losing the allegiance abilities from the army that it's in, and you can't use any of the host armies' battle traits or their enhancements at all. So you're losing a lot of power and potential there. And then in addition to that, it's, because they aren't synergizing with anything in your army, it's hard to find something that is good enough to want to pull in that doesn't need to synergize with your army and fills a role that you don't already have, and that you don't just have better options to work around it in some other way. So it seems like allies and coalition are turning into something that is really more narratively oriented, which I think is kind of cool. I think it's very, very difficult to balance this game or any game when you have that ability to just swap in things from all over the place. If you look at in order, if you look at Stormcast Eternals, how they can just go into any other army, if those things were really just such good independent operators on their own and didn't need to synergize with anything else in an army to just be good, they'd be popping up in every army list that is in order. But we don't really see that. So why is that happening? Or why isn't that happening? I think it's just not that competitive of a choice. And that's also not really a bad thing, I don't think. I think it's kind of forced to be, because if it didn't work that way, they would not be able to balance this. There would always be synergies they didn't notice, and it would just be a mess. So I think we're in a good spot with this. I think it's cool and fun. I think it's leaving me open. It's kind of giving me some thoughts about how to use things. The fact that I have a Slaves to Darkness army right now at all is because of the state that everything was in before all of like the coalition rules started to shift. I started building my Slaves to Darkness back when all of the Slaves to Darkness stuff could just take a Nurgle mark and benefit from all of the synergies and allegiance abilities in Maggotkin. And it was just like, oh, I'm just going to have a massive selection of things to do. And then there was a change of rules, and I was like, I guess I'll just have a Slaves to Darkness army now. And it's all still Nurgle marked and painted, but that is kind of what it is at this point. And, now picking up some Pestigore to just kind of, count as Bestigore and, be used as allies in coalition. And, I have some Skaven Pestilence stuff from also having a Skaven army that I think is going to get shoved in narratively speaking. I don't think it's really like competitive options, but again, this is just to be cool and fun and, do interesting things and also just have more cool models to paint that kind of all can work in together in a theme. Anyway, I think I'm going to leave it here for now. Drop some ideas below if you have any of your own thoughts on allies and coalition, what you might think should be different, if we should have some other special rules going on than we already have. Do you like the older style of coalition and allies when things were more open in the Chaos Grand Alliance? Anyway, and of course, if I missed anything, are there any awesome allies or coalition units that I'm just not thinking of? All right, guys, I will talk to you all later. Have a good one.